Hi, this is Ida Walsh, and in this video we're going to be talking about rentals for landlords. Specifically, we're going to talk about the landlord process as it pertains to Remax Premier, understanding some of the terms, the tenant process, and disclosures and addendums and some other information that we feel you should know. We know that your rental investment is a big investment on your part, and finding the right agent and tenants for your home is going to be very impactful. You need to find an agent that actually understands all of these different things and potential issues or questions that you may have. And somebody that's keeping up with this information is the kind of agent that you're looking for. Now, that being said, you have to understand that real estate agents are just real estate agents, even though there are some things that you should know, such as all these different things in here. We're going to go through and so that you can understand what real estate agents are not doing or they're not qualified to do. So any kind of contract is a legally binding contract, so you need to make sure that you read through everything, and if you do have questions, please seek legal counsel. Now we're going to go over the rental listing agreement, and this agreement is actually between the landlord and the broker and the agent. Now the agent works for a brokerage, so it's actually a contract between the landlord and the broker and the agent. So, rental representation. So there are actually two sides to a rental representation. There's the landlord agent and then there's a tenant agent. Now in some cases, tenants may not have an agent, in which case the landlord agent can facilitate the process. So what's the difference? Basically, the landlord owes fiduciary duties to the landlord, and the agent that represents the tenant owes fiduciary duties to the tenant. So what do they do exactly? So the listing agent will actually list and market your property. We'll get the online application ready, review the application. We'll have communications with you going back and forth. He or she will coordinate the NTN for processing, creation of the lease after the application acceptance, or providing a rejection letter, basically communicating with the other agent or the tenants. If there's not an agent on the other side, and handles required money appropriately. So the tenant agent basically shows the tenant the properties and guides them through the application or the lease process. So those are the two sides that you need to be aware of. Now there are tenant laws, and these need to be looked at, and we do provide the download for this so that you have an idea of a reference point, or if you have any specific questions, we also have legal counsel as well. All right. Again, we have to disclose here that we're not lawyers. So for specific legal questions, we'll refer you to our attorney that we provide on Remax Premier's half. But if you have a legal counsel on your own, then please make sure that you consult with them. Now, the other thing is the military clause. Now, we understand that military life can be very, very tough. From a landlord's perspective, you need to understand that there is a specific military clause which allows a military member to terminate a lease if transferred. And so there are different terms here. You can see the permanent change of station or temporary additional duty if those kind of come in and they need to relocate or move. As long as it's 35 miles from the rental property, they can terminate the lease. So there are some specific clauses that you need to be aware of, and just to be prepared for. So another thing is for landlords to understand that we don't make decisions on the behalf of the landlord. We simply list and market the property. We go through that process, bring in interested tenants, we market the property, assist in the processing, communicate, handle paperwork, even go through that entire, guiding the person through the application process, etc. But ultimately, you're the one who's going to make the decision. So how does it really work? At Remax Premier, we use National Tenant Network. So they're the ones that will go in and look through each application and look at their national criminal background check, an employment verification, a credit check, and landlord references. So once somebody submits their application, NTM will process through this, and sometimes they may not be able to find some of this information. In that case, you need to look at the report and feel confident or request for additional investigations. So again, disclaimers, obviously We're not attorneys, we're not, investigators or inspectors, tax advisors, structural engineer, a mold and air quality expert, etc. So we just want to make sure that you understand. There's also the sex offender list. So these are all the things that people will look for, and it's good for you to be aware of as well, just so you have an understanding of what we're required to do and what you'll need to do on your behalf, and even after the property is rented. All right, so what are the steps? So how do you go through this whole landlord process? So the first thing is meeting with your agent and understanding the process. Now, if you're out of town or out of the country, you can always do a webinar or a Skype. Obviously, you can do FaceTime as well. Again, we want to make sure that you understand the Virginia Residential and Landlord Tenant Act. Now, state of Virginia uses VRLTA lease. If you are using a different type of lease, then you might not be able to use our process. Another thing is you have to ensure that you understand the legality and the risks when it comes to that, because the state of Virginia bases it on the VRLTA. So you'll need to consult with your attorney if you're going to be using a different type of lease. All right. Next thing is the review and the lease terms. So these are things that you need to think about when you're thinking about renting your property. So outline what you're comfortable putting into the lease. Okay, how long to rent for minimum and maximum terms. The price, the maintenance repair fees and service call requirements, the utilities, leased services such as security service or yard maintenance, etc. Review the lease and outline questions you may have to get answered. All right. So again, these are some of the other things. We're going to have to discuss the lease and the disclosures. So there are things that you need to disclose to the tenants, such as the HOA or condo rules and regulations for pets and parking and moving, etc., so that they're aware. They have to comply by those rules. Pets, what kind of pets and types of pets that are allowed. And we're going to actually talk about comfort or service animals, because that's now becoming a very big topic and could be a concern for some landlords. The non-pets or the service or comfort animals, which we talked about, smoking or non-smoking, the county vouchers, so Section 8, the Section 8 process and how to get approved if you were looking to do that process. If there needs to be a lead-based paint disclosure and other disclosures and addendums. So we can talk about this when you're ready, but these are some of the things that you really need to think about and feel comfortable when it comes to creating a rental or a lease. Now, when it comes to pets, you have to understand that a pet in somebody's mind may be a completely different animal. So understanding what type of pets, the size and the type, and there could be snakes, there could be miniature ponies and horses, etc. So if your property allows for that, then this might be something that you're going to be okay with. But if it doesn't, then you need to understand, just going back to this, you need to understand that people may have these type of pets as service animals or comfort animals, in which case they're not considered pets per se, because they're now more on a service provider or a comfort animal, and they usually have some kind of paperwork for that. But you can't deny somebody for having a comfort animal, even though you may say that you don't want pets in your property. So those are some things that you need to think about. Now, the documentation flow, so we're going to go through that. We use DocuSign, which is the global standard for e-signatures. So if you're out of the country or out of state or you're traveling, it's easy. Even if you're local and you want to just use your iPad or your phone or your tablet, you can DocuSign through that. Or you can also sign digitally in person as well. So there's going to be some forms that you need to understand. So we're going to go through that. And just look through this, and if you have any questions with any of these forms, please let us know. All right, so here are the different documents and agreements that you need to review and sign. So the first thing is the listing agreement. There's a rental listing agreement that you'll sign. There's an earnest money disclosure, which we're going to go over. The NTN application and credit processing, so you need to understand what that is and how it works and when. and other disclosures for lead-based, etc. All right, so this is the earnest money deposit. So this is basically a security deposit or deposit that that they need to provide. So if it's option 1, so for Remax Premier we have 2 options. The first month's rent is collected at the signing of the lease, which is usually what we do because they have gone through the application process, etc., and now they're at the next step. And the second one is the full month's rent is collected at the time of the application. Now, we don't like to do that because they're just applying and you don't know if you're going to be accepting them. So after they've gone through the application and we're at the lease section, it's better to collect at that point. But it's up to you. You can request to have full month's rent collected at the application process as well. So those are the 2 options that are available. All right. So the second thing is the Megan's Law disclosure. So again, we talked a little bit about this earlier about the sex offender list. So they need to do their due diligence. I always let the landlords know that they should do their due diligence as well, just to see if somebody has moved nearby and you're renting it to a family or etc. So this is just something good for you to know and be aware of because tenants will be looking for that as well. All right, so again, this is the sex offender website, which you should have the link below, or we should have provided you with that already. Now, the lead-based paint disclosure, we need to provide that for any homes that were built 1978 or earlier. So again, this is something that could be a health hazard for some people, but we need to provide the brochure and the disclosure for that. So what does your agent do? Your agent will go through and complete a rental property input sheet. This basically has all of that information. We'll enter this information into the multiple listing service. We'll get the proper signature and package it up for delivery. Once that's there, the agent is delivered to the transaction coordinator. Now, Remax Premier uses a transaction coordinator that basically goes through step by step to make sure that everything is signed, everything is correct before it gets processed. Step 3, the transaction coordinator will actually create an online application. There's a link, and that link is then emailed to the agent so that the agent can go in and put it into the MLS for anyone who may be interested in applying. Now your online application will be ready, and there's a $50 currently, and this may change, so please check with us, make sure that it's still $50, but there's a $50 per person application fee for anyone that's over 18 years old. So the agent will add this application link to our MLS, which is called Bright MLS, so that it can update on major websites. So this will get syndicated to hundreds of different websites so that your listing will be available for others. So again, your listing will be available. Now let's understand the rentals tenant process. So what do they need to go through? Again, make sure that you understand this is a Remax Premier process. Some other brokers have different processes. So let's go over the tenant rental process specifically for Remax Premier. So tenants are interested in the property, right? They may or may not have an agent. Then they're instructed to go online and fill out the application form. They'll basically pay the application fee at the time of application. Once that is complete, then we'll get notification from NTN about an application being completed. Then we'll review the application and we will contact you, the landlord, to share that information with you. And so the agent will ask you if you want to do the credit analysis, and you'll say go ahead and process. After reviewing the information that we received, then you will get an NTN report. So what this looks like is, here are some examples actually. One had a low score, one had a pretty good score. So let's look at those. So here's one that had an application score of 55, and they recommend reject application. So you can see here that it says reject application, and then there are some, obviously some information that are highlighted so that you're aware of why the applicant score was 55. So there could be another one that has great application score. For example, in this one it's 95, but acceptance with conditions. So again, you need to look at this report to make sure you understand. So the minimum employment verification could not be done. So this is saying verification is required. So at that point, your agent or we would request some kind of a verification from the tenant. Rent to income, not verified. So obviously, if you didn't have the employment, you may not have been able to do the income. And then if there's any other definitions or information, that basically is included in this report, you need to take a look at it, because ultimately this is your decision. In some cases, obviously, there are some conditions such as, there may be a death, the spouse, they might have lost a spouse, or they may be in the middle of a divorce, etc. So there are just different scenarios that you may want to consider when it comes to the applications. So agent sends the landlord for acceptance or rejection, right? So we'll send you a DocuSign. And again, this is going to be your decision. You're going to look at all of the information, and if you decide to reject, for example, if the report came out at 50 or 55, just like we saw, then you say, I don't want to risk it. I want to go ahead and reject. Then your agent will send a notice to the tenant applicant and will include a letter that was sent from NTN only. So we don't do any explanations or anything, but we just send the letter from NTN so that they can understand maybe it's their credit score, etc. We don't send the letter to the agent because that's a private process, but we will send a notice to the agent. And if they're approved, then we'll send a notice basically saying your application has been approved. We'll notify both the tenant and the agent. Then we'll draft up the lease and update the MLS with status called application received. After the application is accepted, then the lease is created. Again, this is the kind of stuff that you need to think about, what you're going to feel comfortable with, what you want to allow. So you can complete this either in person or online. Once the application is accepted and then the lease terms are agreed upon, then your property will be officially rented. Now, we always recommend the tenants and the landlord walk through the property and outline the condition of the property. We always recommend that you take pictures of items and conditions of the property for both the tenants and the landlords. Then you need to make sure that your insurance is going to reflect the fact that your property is being rented. So you want to have renter's insurance. On top of that, you may want to require your tenant to have renter's insurance so that the tenant's possessions are also covered, just in case. Utilities. So whether you provide the utilities or not, you need to make that decision. Obviously, the utilities will need to get switched over to the tenant, so coordination of that needs to take place. All right, so keys and deposits. You'll receive the security and pet and other deposits, and then the tenant will receive all the keys and the fobs, etc., anything that comes with the property or for accessing different parts of the property. All right, so if you have any questions in the meantime, this was an overview of how Remax Premier does the process. If you have any questions in the meantime, we should include an application and the tenant landlord information. You should have that below with the links. And in the meantime, if you have any other questions, please give us a call. And you make it a blessed day.